Hello, welcome to the Dark Path podcast. I've been very busy the last few weeks with my business and my business channel's posts, the Vancouver Dojo, the learning how to edit videos. It's been an interesting week. So I got a little backlogged with the podcast posts, but we're going strong now, so things should be picking up in a bit. Definitely some interesting interviews coming up, so look out for that. Today I thought I want to chat about my career. And you know how if you chat with somebody long enough, eventually the topic will likely naturally turn to, what you do for a living. And I believe that I'm lucky enough to have found a vocation that I love. But of course, it is a very unusual path to take. Teaching martial arts is definitely not something I chose to do intentionally until it kind of just happened. Now, it really is not something that most people know much about, and that's fine. I do get some odd questions here and there, and that's fine too. That's part of the fun. What's not fun, and part of the problem right now, in a bigger sense, but also in terms of my own life, in the business, is that people are afraid of each other's faces. People are afraid to be close enough to touch one another. People are afraid to breathe near each other. They're afraid of other things they shouldn't be afraid of either. But these things of being near another person, looking them in the face, really interacting with them, right? When you train, these are key components of training. It's literally the opposite of what you're supposed to do, so it's very problematic. So I end up never knowing exactly generally, prior to the last few years, I never know exactly what the reaction might be when I say that I teach punching and kicking for a living, is when I talk to somebody. But it's even more, it's somewhat more convoluted now. But I guess in a way it's also not. Anyway, over the years, I've learned to read the reactions of people pretty well. And I admit I will sometimes intentionally avoid discussing what I do, my business, mainly so as not to confuse people or to get into unnecessary conversations and especially allow them to project any sort of misreading or misunderstanding of me based on a prior bias of what they think martial arts are. This is, it's everybody has to navigate these things. And so, I have met many others who have similar predicaments to deal with in terms of their jobs and careers. Although, of course, usually in radically different professions. But I think it's common enough that people sometimes struggle with that. In particular, I had a student once who was conducting some pretty rough scientific research experiments on animals. It took months for her to feel comfortable enough to tell me that. And it was obvious when she told me that the expectation was that I would be upset after hearing it. It was something to hear. But more so, she expected me to judge her for it, and I didn't. Rather, I wanted her to keep training, keep coming to classes, because I saw the internal conflict she was holding within herself when she confessed these somewhat nasty aspects of her profession. And as I said, I think many people have jobs where they know that some aspect of the job or some part of the overarching organization they're a part of is not great, and this causes it creates some amount of internal tension, internal questioning. And this can happen with jobs where 99% of it is wonderful, but there's that one thing that's I don't know if I like that. And so that I don't think judging people for It is just part of life. Lots of jobs have possibilities, at least within them, that are pretty rough. So yeah, I think that at least unless it's criminal behavior, that's what it is. So for me, compassion is tied to this idea I have of an aim of a better world, and to me it seems like we should encourage people to work at rectifying their inner conflicts, and however that may be possible in any whatever context. But more importantly to my mind in this discussion right now, it is an idea that is right at the heart of what I think is how to aim at a better world. So, for example, like I can dislike the work that this person was doing, but I still want to help them. I can dislike a person's political and philosophical outlook, but I can do that, but I can still like that person as a person. For myself, I generally can get along with pretty much anybody, so long as they allow me to be. They don't try to interfere unnecessarily in my life. That's kind of the thing that bothers me the most. But I think that really is the basis of the social contract, and I don't think that really would be controversial. But it is astonishing to me to see how people right now are foregoing the responsibilities of the social contract and willingly, intentionally dogpiling on the new cultural pariahs, which is, of course, the unvaccinated. I mean, this behavior, it's abhorrent, but it is the result of what fear and weakness does to the mind. So it's not like this has never happened before. It's just sort of seeing it play out. It's crazy. Now, again, so in aiming at a better world, for me, it's important that you can dislike. What I would say is you can dislike a noun. You can dislike a person, a place, or a thing, but that should not affect your overall sense of humanity. And definitely, just disliking something should not be used as a way to validate harsh and even cruel actions against the nouns, the people, place, or things that you might dislike. I think that is the point of having a moral code. Moral codes are the fabric that weaves society together, right? But this disconnect from the things you don't like, and then the greater overarching expression of justice in this society. Justice is blind for a reason, and that those are important reasons. So you don't attack things just because you don't like them in that way. And of course, this is born out of the idea we know that revenge is like a fire. The desire it grows quickly out of control at every opportunity, and it burns everybody, the person that lit it and others. So now back to the story about the former student. I would have been okay with it if through training and self-reflection she had changed careers. But that was not to be the case. For her, training was a minor blimp on her life's path. For me, martial art training has proven to be the paving stones upon which my path is built. It's interesting too, I always reflect on how that I didn't mean to do that. It just took my attention. Now, I thought I would share a quick bit about my background in that regard, in terms of my relationship to martial arts. So I tend to believe that my relationship with the martial arts started when I was a kid. I mean, for so many kids, I think the seed for that gets planted at a very early age, in how a fascination with superheroes characters. Usually, whatever cartoon you can sort of happen to be watching. Particularly, I remember being mesmerized at a very young age by the cartoon character called He-Man. And He-Man had this. It was an interesting show. He had two sides to his character, and one side of him would come forth as the great warrior, and he would draw this sword, and he would hold it up to the sky, and he would say, "I have the power," and lightning would strike the sword, and then he would become supercharged, and he would ride a tiger. He'd ride a tiger into battle. So I mean, how is that not cool? But he said, I have the power. What does he mean by? Why is that fascinating, even to a little kid? Why is it? I want my power. I want to express power. There's something to that calls to people, I think. I think that the warrior archetype is part of the archetypal structures of the collective consciousness. So it's a part of everybody in a way. Anyway, in any case, I do remember copying He-Man with my own sword, usually made from cardboard or simply imagination. And again, nobody told me to do that. It just caught my attention, and I couldn't help but respond. So the next element is despite being drawn to these superhero themes, I was actually a pretty shy kid for the most part. I ended up getting bullied as a consequence, and because of that, I ended up joining a boxing gym when I was maybe 12 or 13. It was actually my dad's idea, and something I'll always be grateful to him for, because it was a great idea, and it, amongst other things, got me to have spent time with my grandfather, because it was a complicated sort of driving to and fro thing for my parents to work out. So anyway, I was 12 or 13 years old, and the boxing club changed my world, changed my life forever. It showed me I could stand up for myself, and the bullying ended up stopping in a fairly dramatic fashion because of that, which was interesting. But it also showed me, and I want to talk about this in other podcasts in a different way, is that through high intensity cardio exercise, I could beat back my chronic childhood asthma, and that was eye-opening, to say the least. Now, since then, some amount of martial art skills and training has continued throughout my life. I wasn't always training at a dojo, but I always kept training, basically. The boxing lasted a couple of years, then I jumped into kickboxing for about another year, and then in my late teens, joined a karate club, Goju-Ryu karate specifically. In my mid-20s, I met a new karate teacher and began training in Tai Chi Chuan, and then down the road a ways, in my 30s, I began a serious study of Daito-Ryu as well. I continue to practice all these arts to this very day, and I hope to do so until I die. But all along, I have had the sense that there was something going on with these practices that went beyond just the obvious physical and mental health benefits. Not that those benefits are minor or trivial or anyway. They're profound and they're on their own. But it seemed to me, and it still does, that these arts are somehow threaded into the fabric of life itself. But how can arts that are based on the science of struggle and combat and war be so profoundly entwined with the ways of like life and existence, and ultimately the ways of peace? Well, it seems to me that there always has been struggling to survive in life's existence. But in that struggle, life has gathered all of its strength. So the relationship between struggling and surviving, it may not be as antagonistic as it seems. Now, I can only really encourage people to try training at a dojo or a martial arts gym to find out for yourself if this has any validity to it or not. There are, of course, countless dojos and gyms throughout the world. And while not all training is equal, if one is genuinely seeking for it, they usually can find a teacher near them that's worth learning from. Especially if you're new, then it's good to try a couple things and see what works. But even if there's no place near you, you can move. There's people out there trying to teach these arts if you're interested in learning them. That's the point. Now, there's also an old saying that when the student is ready, a teacher will appear or emerge. And I would say that such a student who is genuinely seeking should be ready as best they can without a teacher. In just any situation, they're just as ready as they're doing as best they can. And that sense of readiness, it's tied to the same basic impulse that just underlies life. It's the drive to stay alive. It's I'm ready to act at any moment, sort of thing. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more esoteric with it. It is possibly the source energy for motivation required on all challenges, especially challenges conjured up by the unknown, which make decision-making extra convoluted. The reason I say this is because it's not a conscious thought. It's just an impulse to act. There's a readiness. I'm ready to act if I need to. And so if you're ready and the teacher appears, you can learn. Now, whether you're a single-celled amoeba or a giraffe, in order to survive, you do always need to be ready to move, to act, to follow the impulses of your instincts at all times. So these most basic impulses are inseparable from life. But the teacher's looking for the student who is showing they're ready, their energy is seeking for knowledge in that time. Now, to me, one of the great wonders of the impossible reality we exist in can be seen in how life somehow wants to live of its own accord. No life ever seeks its own end. And it wants to stay alive despite all the costs. It's willing to do anything to continue to stay alive. That's amazing. It's wonderful. It's amazing. Beyond that, given a chance, life always seems to seek to thrive as well. Now in this, on a personal level, I hear a quiet but steady encouragement seemingly coming right out of the universe or reality itself, sort of pushing ahead and saying, never give up, keep pushing, keep going. So it seems like life itself knows its own value in some inexplicable way, or some way that's difficult for the human mind to fully encapsulate. So this leads me to an assumption that life itself is actually the most valuable thing possible. Value is, of course, a complex idea. I was recently talking with Justin Nearing about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but just also about currency and value. And so value is a very complex idea, but for me, the greatest value could never be units of measurement, money, or objects, or stuff. And I don't mean that to put down those things, because those things can add great value to the life if they're sort of integrated in the right way, and that's great. But, without being alive, and also without other living people to share it with, you have nothing. There's nothing. Now, this all matters to me because how a person sees reality this matters to me because how a person sees reality is the basis of how they will act in the world. If something other than life is placed at the top of their hierarchy of values, it means life isn't their top concern. It means a disregard for human life, including their own, or other life in general, is inevitable. This, obviously cannot lead to desirable behavior. Worse, right now, I would say for society, is it seems like a very dangerous thing for civilization to do, which I think we're doing. We're taking the value of life out of the center place of our focus as a society. And by not placing a conscious acknowledgement of life's sacred value at the forefront of our lives and society, well, the path that follows such decisions is dark indeed. So what I am doing is trying to point at the idea of life's existence being first and foremost the center of focus in the creation of value in the world, and however value concepts are created. We know, but by nature, life is temporal, it's fragile, it's easily disrupted, and it literally requires constant work to upkeep. So, it takes a full commitment to realize its potential. But since the drive to stay alive is born out of the oldest and deepest layers of ourselves, the placement of the idea of life being the main value into the center of our conscious awareness, it should lead to great joy if there's no skeletons in the basement, in the closet, I guess, to speak of. Meaning, it should align those energies. It means that the idea is that aligning one's basic instincts for survival with a consciously crafted, a consciously worked out conceptualization of values represents a kind of integration of those parts of the self. This makes it both sustainable as an exercise to harmonize these parts, and as a way of increasing the value of the given life a person is living at the moment as well. So it increases the experience of the life as well as the long-term sustainability of life in general. Now, through that lens of putting life at the center focus of value, things that of course promote and enhance life are emphasized, and we might call them self-care exercises or self-preservation, I guess. And things that hurt or destroy life are resisted, and life teaches us that resistance can come without reserve, without holdback if necessary, and then you call that self-defense. Now, to my mind, this framework, it's a very simplistic framework really, but it can be overlaid onto Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, even shamanistic traditions, and basically any belief structure is going to inherently have to do this to some degree, because however God or the divine or the spirit world might be conceptualized, the value of the gift of being alive it has to be the greatest and most glorious gift possible. I can't imagine anything else that would really take away from that. So, if it can be said then that this spark, this impulse that ignites the eyes and separates, or what would you could say is able to separate a living body from a dead one, is a gift, or it can be thought of as a gift anyways, I think that's a good idea, of the most profoundly divine source imaginable. So, what does that mean? How does that relate to martial arts? And to living in general, and to just everything that we've been talking about in this podcast. Well, I've been building towards something so how about this? It's the case that the spark which, if it's the case that the spark which animates all life is the same source energy as the impulse all creatures have to stay alive, those things are the same, maybe then it's also the same energetic source that inspires human beings to achieve the things we call art and technology and other wonders. What if these things were either could be aligned, or they're all stemming from the same source? So at the base level, this impulse, this spark, is just simply called survival, the impulse to stay alive, to survive. But what does that mean for humans? And as I have said in previous podcasts, and I want to come back to, once in a while, is survival isn't enough for the human creature to achieve their potential. You can't show an adult human being that's just alive and say they've achieved their potential. They need to do something more than that. Now, this is important because it connects, it's attempting to connect survival to higher potentials, or you could say base instincts to what might be called like higher cognitive functions. Especially, I find it interesting that you might be able to draw a line between the readiness and impulse to stay alive and artistic expression. If those energies are connected, the implications of that are very interesting. Now, if life is then set on the highest place on the sort of altar of meaning and value in the world, it means then it can be used as a central focus or aim, and a person can then begin to align their base instincts, ideally, and their sense of intuition and their higher calling. And then, as I just sort of said, like these seemingly like disconnected aspects of a person's self can become more focused and balanced and harmonized together, and the person can become more whole. And I think that this is important because that's what the sense of inner peace is when the various expressions of the self are aligned and comfortable within their place in the world, so to speak. Now, for this to happen, it's known by psychologists and philosophers alike that human beings need to have a working and satisfactory belief system when facing the world. So that harmonization is coming from this belief system. It is, of course, both the gift and curse of the mind that to be at peace, we humans need that. We need a perspective that can account for reality and our place within it. Now, there are many beliefs and religions in the world, and I have respect for let's say 99% of the ones that I've ever seen. There's some goofy ones out there, but the main ones, of course, I have tremendous respect for. I think that a tradition exists because it wouldn't exist, I should say, if it didn't contain profound and worthwhile knowledge. And it's worth taking a serious look at any of them if you're called to do so, or just if you're curious, it's worthwhile. But the question comes back for each of us, regardless if you have a religious affiliation or not. What is at the center of your belief system? What is your highest value? If it's not your life, then how do you justify that? I mean, if it's not life in general, I should say, it's how do you justify that? If there's something in place of the value of life in your hierarchy of values, what is it? Now, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that everything one does is a downstream. Everything one does in life is a downstream consequence of the answer to those questions. And I don't think this idea is particularly hard to understand when put into a more direct sort of context. I mean, no amount of money is worth your life, right? I mean, I'll give you $20 billion tomorrow if you don't sleep through the night. Like what? Like what? No one would want that. And it just so happens that this conception of value of life being the greatest value is also, I think, the most fundamental and key presupposition of the martial arts. So I remember I once asked my karate sensei about the roots of the use of what's called a bow staff, which is a 6-foot-long pole weapon. It's used in quite a few martial art traditions throughout Japan and China and Okinawa. My training with that weapon comes mainly through, we can just say, an Okinawan tradition called kabuto. Now, for the most part, the roots of much of the traditional Okinawan arts, traditional martial arts of karate and kabuto can be traced to southern Chinese systems. But I was thinking, I wanted to know where they had learned their knowledge from, the ancestors to the in Okinawan arts. So I decided to chase the idea, and I chased it for some time, researching and looking up things and reading and thinking. And before I realized, though, that really the first handheld weapon technique ever discovered would likely be with a piece of wood, maybe a rock, but a piece of wood. And that technique would have possibly been taught. I mean, that would have to go back to one of our very early human ancestors who is able to put together in their mind and understand somehow, to some rudimentary level anyways, that hitting with a stick was very effective. But I would assume that would also give them the idea that getting hit by the same stick is very, very undesirable. So it stands to reason then that like a parental figure, let's say, who is able to discern this insight, to make sense of this, would likely want to pass on the knowledge to their kids, to their offspring, and a tradition could emerge. Now, this process, obviously, I think would mirror all cultural development, and so it's possible the martial arts skills might have been a part of the formation and creation of human society. And in some way, they are a part of us and have been for as long as we have been human. Now, it's interesting to think about that too, because it would take many, many generations. But, I can imagine then a catalog of skills can be built. And that's really the beginning of a system. And this can go all the way back to thousands of years ago. And it seems right at the heart of human society because these martial skills would have been intertwined with hunting skills, and as well as providing for a more safer and more controlled social environment for the group. A lot of advantages. Not only that, but the efforts it would take in building and maintaining such a system To do that could only make sense to people who themselves thought carefully about the future and themselves. So the skills of passing on early martial techniques would have been clearly beneficial in a direct physical way, direct way. But I really wonder about this, because the mental tools required to maintain a large knowledge base in that context would also encourage many important cognitive abilities. Memory, of course, learning processes, understanding process in general, be able to plan. All of these are important examples of the types of skills required to develop what would be then, in that case, a multi-generational martial art. And so much could be carried on the back of that transfer of knowledge too. Behavioral ideas, cultural ideas, religious ideas, they can all be integrated into training. And I think that they were for a lot of early cultures. So I think it's reasonable to estimate that martial arts are a genuinely important part of human evolution. And that's a part that's possibly not studied enough. And it might be kind of fun to study. Now, I actually believe the martial arts hold a key within them that might be very helpful in at least trying and assisting in providing a way to redirect the energy behind the violence in human behavior, both in a general and a specific way, or general and a more individual way, and not just externalized forms of violence, but also critically, because of the ability of the arts to work at these internal conflicts, it has the possibility of addressing some of the internal struggles that are causing self-harming behaviors in people and society at this time, which is unfortunately a very real problem, and seems to be growing. One example would be suicide, which is definitely a significant issue these days, particularly in younger people in many ways. Here in BC and throughout the world too, I don't want to take away from anybody, but definitely here in BC, it's been crazy and horrible amount of drug overdoses, and they're killing so many people. And both of these things are terrible and unfortunate, but they're also examples of things that are born out of internal struggles, where a person seeks to alleviate those struggles by drugs or other drugs or a bullet. And of course that doesn't solve the problem, but that's the impulse. It's gone in the wrong direction. Now those are only two examples, but it's important to remember too that in any case, life still just wants to live. So no drug addict ever began using because they wanted to destroy their body and destroy their relationships and end up homeless and desperate enough and do terrible things for survival. They were seeking something, and in real desperation, which many people don't know, but if you should know, is in real desperation, anything that offers any amount of hope, or escape, or peace, or calmness, even just for a moment, is usually then grasped as tightly as it can. This tends to be made worse if the person feeling that sense of desperation has no sense of self and no sense of purpose to fall back on, no sense of role in the community to fall back on. So these escape routes are the blue pill, so to speak, because they offer no solutions. They're only at best escapes, minor escapes, and harmful escapes in terms of some, like drugs, or some drugs anyways, quite damaging. Not all drugs. Now, this is most likely a key reason why some people cannot let go of masks, even if they're outside and alone, and other useless nonsense in that same way. There's a desire to grasp desperately at anything that can even sort of pretend to offer some security in a moment of fear and doubt and desperation. There's that desire, whatever works. And this is, in many ways, the Achilles heel for all sentient beings, which means like all, like, rabbits and orcas and everything. That impulse is there to grasp anything in a moment of desperation that you can. Now, in fact, it seems right now that the way that COVID has broken down society is actually a massively clear example of this. Fear begets desperation. So things are rooted in the fear, but the desperation is sort of how they're playing out. And then, when led by blinded and ideologically compromised people with who they themselves have no real sense of self or purpose or greater picture purpose, society cannot do anything but spiral down a very dark hole. And I don't think it's controversial to say that there are no solutions in escapism. Just like there are no solutions in or usefulness in doubling down on ineffective policies, which seems to be the way of the world right now. So whether it's all the unfortunate stuff, drug abuse or suicide or mental illness, or people mindlessly obeying nonsensical government diktats about health and whatever, the roots of these behaviors are coming from places of internal conflict. And because they're mainly escapisms, deflections from the issues, those issues will remain unresolved. And in terms of the personal individual issues, they will remain unresolved until the individual person is willing to do the hard work it takes to work through them. And then my hope is that enough people overall to do that, and then society can actually move forward. That's the hope. Now, the outcome of having internal struggles go unresolved is dangerous. It always either ends up in violence or disease. Kind of a moderate example, but it would be like eating garbage food, fast food, smoking, drinking cheap beer all the time. All these things can contribute to a heart attack. That is an example of sort of an infliction of violence on the self in a certain way. The massive damage done by a heart attack is a physical outcome that is, in a sense, violence in that sense, but it's done through the internal disconnect or conflict that the person who developed those habits wasn't dealing with. There's something going on there. So what then would cause a person to consume really terrible, known terrible food and drink and become very unhealthy and not do anything about that? It's hard to think a person in that situation doesn't have self-valuation and self-worth issues at the roots of that entire lifestyle. So they're not putting the value of life at the center of their focus, and they're not being honest with themselves. That's an internal conflict about their health as it declines. Now, in terms of violence, it can actually be said that all acts of violence, including the most important one, just including the most obvious, I guess, would be the externalized violence towards others. They all can be said to start with internal conflicts of the person who's expressing them. But that's actually another podcast topic I want to touch into eventually. And of course, violence, like that word, is often misused by people these days who cannot seem to really fathom the reality of violence in a real way, and say things as ridiculous as that words themselves are violence, and just basically what they're saying is if I feel afraid for any reason, that means it's violence. That's just that's really terrible and dangerous to a certain degree. Anyway, It seems then, to come back to the topic of the moment, that the foundation of life is a drive to stay alive. That at the foundation of life, anyways, is this drive to stay alive, and that drive is the same as in humans as it is in all life. Now, I have then suggested that the energy behind that drive comes from the same source as the energy that drives us to achieve our highest potentials, even in things as abstract as art. So, the drive to evade a predator that has been around for millennias, I'm saying it's connected in the schema I am using to the drive that pushes us to create beautiful music, or further, some abstract mathematical theory. So this may be the case, but the desire to succeed, to survive and succeed, is often not met with the actual success being desired, right? Just because you want to live doesn't mean you will. Just because an animal tries to, acquire a territory doesn't mean it will. Now, partly this is for human beings because we are, especially right now at this time in history, constantly sabotaging ourselves with terrible false beliefs about life and ourselves and our abilities. But this is also partly because since life began, there has always been conflict. It's why it's called a drive to stay alive. This drive to stay alive has always been met with intense pushback. Life eats life, and as the brilliant band Tool says, this is necessary. Now, for most species, for almost all species, as far as we can tell, really, there's no concern over why, or the why and the what, in terms of the motivation for their lives. They simply strive to continue to exist without any concern or sense of self-reflecting weighing them down. I think that's kind of why we like animals, actually. That's one of the reasons. Now, for us, these things, these reflective contemplations are critical and must be balanced in order to stay alive, but also to any success that we might be seeking. And that could be just the success of a reasonable society. But think of it this way, like before one could enter a battle with any possibility of surviving, which there's never a guarantee, but it would, possibilities, there's a need to know who are they fighting for and why, and who are they, which is to say some amount of self-knowledge, including how they would fit into the bigger picture. Now, if these things were not clear, then one can basically safely assume they're just cannon fodder. In contrast, the person who could answer these questions clearly, who they are, where they're there, who they're serving, all of these things, they would gain a great advantage in the battlefield, because they would not be in conflict within themselves. This means they could then pour all of their abilities and their focus and their attention into the situation at hand. Now, this idea of pouring all of yourself into the moment that you're in is in many ways the pinnacle of martial prowess. The attainment of such clear clarity and presence that anything that is offered is thrown at a person in such a state of mind. Could be a punch, or it could be someone trying to convince them to feel terrible about themselves, that these things are easily refuted. Such a state of mind, such an ability, such a person expressing themselves this way is very possible. Try imagine the idea that you have the ability to control your emotions well enough that, say, for instance, you can never be sucked into an ad or a politician's nauseant but carefully crafted whining, which is really all they do. Imagine the new power that would give you if none of these things affected you. And I'm suggesting that all it takes is a little bit of awareness to start that process. And then, like a wave gathering momentum, a mind that can be free of all distraction cannot easily be stopped. And this was true for the warrior on the ancient battlefield or even the modern battlefield. It's true for the person today, right now, who's going to commit themselves to a business they create in sort of a lighter way. It's true for a person who just wants to win a foot race with their friends. If they can just focus clearly on what they're doing, they're going to have the best chance of that anyways. And I would encourage especially that it's true for all of the brave people, all the brave souls out there who can see the wild insanity of the world right now and are fighting for a more honest and better world. Keep your mind clear. Now, this needs to be monitored, right? You have to sort of have a way to monitor this. And in the martial arts, the relationship to one's own clarity and peace of mind is maintained through training, which is, again, why I tend to focus so much on that idea with people, at least with people training in the dojo. Keep training. So the expression of a kata, which is a prearranged sequence of movements, or even a single technique, a throw or something, can act as a mirror to the practitioner, which shows them how clear and focused they really are. Now, this is the art part of martial arts. There's no perfection, it's just a process. Now, the same idea of a mirror reflecting to a practitioner through their expressions exists, I think, in any form of art. But I like to kind of smile and point out that only in the martial arts is the point of the artistic exercise literally also an act of embodied self-defense. So the practical and the artistic abstract value really comes together. So to recap, so once the basics are met, food, exercise, and sleep, then to get clarity, to get peace, to come into alignment, self-awareness and a questioning of who one really is ought to follow. And then, an exploration of what one's morals really are is important to think about as well. Think about, where you sit in society and the world at large, what's going on. These questions, they do need to be addressed, partly only because then can a person be at peace and as I said, have a belief system that makes sense for them. So this is kind of an internal work. Figure out who you are, what you're doing, to some enough degree that you can confidently face the world with your face. This is what I believe Jordan Peterson means when he says to clean up your room. I'd be happy to discuss that if I'm wrong or right. Now, the result of working at this is that once you're actually at peace within yourself to a solid enough degree, then you're ready to deal with combat, with war, with conflict. And that's interesting because that's the answer to the riddle of how the martial arts, which are, based on the knowledge of conflict and battle and war, how they can cultivate peace. It's, to me, a kind of proof of the value of the wisdom of these arts. And it represents a realigning and rebalancing of a seemingly paradoxical phenomenon. You could put it this way, that life is best protected, the value of life is best protected by those with the greatest knowledge of violence and death, so long as those who are protecting it maintain their love of life and love of peace, and that remains clear. Yeah. Now, this whole thing is a process. It's an art. It's a process. And of course, it's not one that ends, although people will inevitably end. The process continues, and it's how you touch into real legacy, what it really means to leave something behind. Now, it can all be done with simple awareness. You can just do it with, at least you can get the process rolling with just some simple breathing, with walking, especially in a park or a forest, and noticing the beauty in a tree. Anything that pulls you back to a recognition of the value of life and the wonder of life and the beauty of life. Then, through time and effort, internal conflicts will come forth. They'll naturally come out when you start to develop some practice. Your self-doubts will be seen, but they can be dismissed. And the false fears, they can be transcended. And then everyone has a chance to know peace internally in themselves. And from there, well, who knows? But it can only be your choice, yours alone, to walk that path and find that peace. And it will mean that you will have to walk even in the dark part of the path. The dark path is part of the process. But there's one thing for sure you can know is you're not alone. Now, I'm going to start to mention this once in a while at the end of podcasts, especially when it's just me on the podcast. But anybody who might be interested, I do run online Qigong classes twice a week where I explore some simple, great exercises for breathing, for blood flow, for mental clarity, for awareness in various ways. Definitely help you through your day. It's just a lunch thing from 12 noon. I'll put a link at the bottom of the post. Now, I have much yet to say about life and martial arts and strategies and health and more people to talk to, more really interesting people to talk to. But I think that's enough for now. Please let me know your comments and questions, your thoughts. You can write them below. I'd be happy to hear from you. So, thank you again for your time spent with me today, and I'll see you again on the dark path.